მოგესალმებით მეგობრებო, გასულ წელს ჩვენს რეგიონში კიდევ ერთი გაყინული მთიანი ყარაბაღის კონფლიქტი galqwa. 2020 წლის სექტემბერში საქართველოს ორ მეზობელ ქვეყანას შორის გაჩაღებულმა კონფლიქტმა, რომელმაც 800-მდე პირის სიცოცხლე შეიწირა, ბევრი დააფიქრა სამხრეთ კავკასიაში მშვიდობის მყიფ ბუნებაზე. სომხეთსა და აზერბაიჯანს შორის მოსკოვის მელხებით გაფორმებულმა ცეცხლის შეწყვეტის შეთანხმებამ კონფლიქტი დროებით გადაჭრა. თუმცა ეს ხანგრძლივ მშვიდობას ვერ მოიტანსო, აცხადებს ბრიუსელში მდებარე გავლენიანი კვლევითი ორგანიზაცია კრიზისის საერთაშორისო ჯგუფი. ომიდან 1 წლის თავზე შეძლებენ თუ არა სამხრეთ კავკასიის ქვეყნების საერთო ენის გამონახვას. რა როლი შეუძლია ითამაშოს თბილის მთიანი ყარაბაღის კონფლიქტის მოგვარებაში და რა ინტერესები ამოძრავებთ რეგიონის სხვა დიდ სახელმწიფოებს. ამ და სხვა თემებზე ჩვენ ვესაუბრებით სწორედ crisis group-ის ანალიტიკოს სამხრეთ კავკასიაში ოლესია ვართანიანს. Ოლესია, thanks for talking to us. So, as I mentioned in the intro, we're nearing the anniversary of the ceasefire agreement struck between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And as your organization noted, the situation remains quite fragile. And hence, we have seen a number of offers put on the table by various countries aimed at ensuring lasting peace in the region. One such thing was South Caucasus Neighborhood Peace Initiative, put forward by Georgian Prime Minister, but he did it without going into details. But yet another proposal, which has really drawn a hefty amount of controversy in Georgia, has been made by Turkey, the so-called 3+3 format that aims to bring together 3 South Caucasus nations together with 3 big regional players, Turkey, Russia, and Iran. And Georgian Foreign Minister David Zolkalyani recently reacted to that format. He said that Georgia should not refrain from engaging in regional cooperation, given that its red lines are not crossed, so that Georgia's territorial integrity is not put at stake. So this statement was, I would say, short on clarity and has prompted a debate about Georgia's role in regional peacemaking in general. What do you think is behind this Russo-Turkish push between 3+3 format, and can it succeed in its aim of bringing together the 3 countries in South Caucasus?
There is no clarity what exactly is the goal of this new proposed format. So some people see it only exclusively as a format that will discuss something related to economic prospects, right, transport, and things like that. And some others, they indicate their interest in discussing something bigger, which is about, for example, some issues related to the conflicts, some of the standing problems between the countries that are mentioned in this format of 3+3. So there is no precise clarity, and I think that provokes quite a lot of speculations. And some of the speculations, they can be well-founded, and some of them not. The thing is that the whole kind of conversation about having some regional format for the discussion, it's not something new. Right. We heard Turkey proposing something like this right after the 2008 war between Georgia and Russia. And we remember that at that particular moment, they actually failed with proposing something that could be viable and could stand kind of, the interests of all these countries. Right now, I'm afraid that there are many more questions, and some of these questions, they have to do with the conflicts. As you mentioned, Georgia has its concerns, Georgia has its formats. One of them is a Geneva process, the other one is Abashidze-Karasin, which is more about normalization. So there is a question, if Georgia enters with 3+3, will it compromise its foreign policy foundation, which is more about the cooperation with the West and going to an integration with the Western institutions? I think that question is very much in the air, and based on how it's kind of what we learn about this and how it can get resolved, then we will understand the future, prospects for the future, with format.
Right, so we're talking about multilateral efforts now. One such thing would have been this 3+3 format, of course, but let's zoom in on Georgia per se for a moment, because Georgia obviously is one of the fellow South Caucasus countries and has a stake in what's going on in the region. And last year we've seen that Georgia really tried to walk a diplomatic tightrope, not to become caught in the crossfire of this ongoing conflict. but still in the thick of war, Georgia sought to sort of lend its mediating services to the warring parties. And I remember that Prime Minister even proposed to host a round of negotiations in Tbilisi. And truth be told, neither Armenia nor Azerbaijan jumped at the opportunity. But still, we have seen that Georgia, through its piecemeal efforts, has achieved some results. And one such thing was, for example, this year, Georgia negotiated or facilitated a return of Armenian prisoners of war in return, I think, for minefield maps. So the question would be whether Georgia's sort of single-handed actions can make a meaningful impact.
In order to stay successful, Georgia needs more support coming from its Western partners. So we saw that the facilitation of this exchange of 15 soldiers for the minefield maps that happened mainly thanks to the mediation, especially from the US. But there was also the participation coming from the EU. Some calls made, by some officials who are currently chairmen in the office, at the OSCE. So what I'm trying to say is that Georgia can provide a forum, for the discussions, but it can, so far it has been acting mainly thanks to its Western partners, and also mainly on some really very kind of specific issues. I think this is really very important for Georgia to find a role in that whole context, mainly because with our two neighbors, and I think during the war, Georgia certainly could feel how much its own security, domestic and also the regional, depends on what's happening in the neighborhood. It has its own genuine interest in peace in the region, so that at least kind of not to increase the Russian presence, for example, which is of concern to the Georgian government. It has to find a way to suggest a list of topics for the conversation that will be first of interest to both, that they can take on board, and I would say that in that sense, the Georgian government might need to think about a longer term interest rather than just kind of short term post-conflict things that need to be solved and settled, but not necessarily, this is not something that Georgia is there for, I would say, So, if Georgia wants to continue doing that, it's good. They just need to think a bit more about what exactly they are proposing to both neighbors, so that it can stay as a viable cooperation for all three.
Right. But do you think that despite its sort of wish to play a role of a peacemaker, Georgia has necessary means, the wherewithal to achieve that goal? Do you think that Tbilisi is doing enough?
Georgi, for years, people in Tbilisi, in the government, they were hearing with pledges, mainly coming from their European and American friends, politicians, officials, analysts, telling them, are you worried about what's going on in your neighborhood? Do you want to do anything to support Armenia and Azerbaijan? And the response that I personally heard a number of times from the Georgian officials is that this whole conflict around Nagorno-Karabakh is a minefield, and you never really understand where you can, spoil your relationship with Armenia or Azerbaijan, which is kind of you can say that they are right, it's really a very difficult topic. But on the other hand, what I'm trying to say is that just because they haven't been acting despite calls, suggestions, offers, and so on for so many years, the fact that they are starting doing things is already so plausible. Okay. You see?
Sure, but now I want to address the elephant in the room, because we've been talking about various venues and iterations of regional peacemaking. But as you all know, and our viewers are well informed about that there is already such a platform since the onset of the conflict, the Minsk Group, which is presided over by the three countries, Russia, US, and France. It has tried to bring together the two warring parties and brought them toward conflict resolution, or at least some sort of settlement. But recently I've read a lot of criticism about how OSCE Minsk Group reacted to the flare-up of tensions, and that it did not engage enough to forestall the bloodshed that we saw last year. Do you think that its efforts have run its course? If you think that OSCE Minsk Group does not respond to sort of today's challenges, then maybe some other participants to the format, mainly European countries that are obviously members of the European Union, should step up the game, try to foster other platforms that won't be dominated by Moscow or other regional actors.
The issue of Nagorno-Karabakh is currently dominated by Russia. And it is a consequence, of course, of the problems related to the OSCE Minsk Group, but also what I'm trying to say is that we already have this kind of, reality when Russia is the main mediator between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And if we do not have the OSCE Minsk Group with its other two co-chairs, which is the US and France, we are effectively leaving the whole conflict in the hands of mediation only of Russia.
Right.
You see? So the resumption of the work of the OSCE Minsk Group is really very essential from the point of view of actually providing an opportunity to other two co-chairs to play a role. And despite all the criticism that the OSCE Minsk Group has been facing, and this is definitely not just related to the past war, there were lots of criticism related to the fact that they haven't really proposed the peace plans or forced, or somehow
Right.
kind of made the conflict parties accept the peace plan, which effectively led to the war. Despite all of this, the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs with format is currently probably the only possible place where to discuss everything related to Nagorno-Karabakh, to the war, to the longer term normalization between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but from the perspective of, in relation to the to Nagorno-Karabakh
Right.
conflict.
And finally, most of the international peacemaking efforts today, I think, are concerned with addressing the issues at hand, like the burning issues in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is, of course, observing the ceasefire and the humanitarian calamity that's unfolding right now in the region. But do you think there are other issues, other venues that can be explored that will help to foster a lasting peace? One thing that comes to mind is, of course, a clause that was famously included in the ceasefire agreement, and that made the two parties pledge to unblock the old Soviet time transport and infrastructure connections.
In fact, it's really very important. And this kind of thing, it's more kind of a liberal turn, I would say, to the kind of issue of restoring relationship, and then you would rather hear it from the Western countries, but in this particular case, it's coming from Russia. The fact that it's kind of pushing, for the restoration of some transportation roads between Armenia and Azerbaijan, so that it can increase an interdependence of these two countries. Because now they live separately for 30 years. All they have been doing for 30 years is fighting each other. We have at least one generation that grew up without seeing a person, like a real person, from the other side. All they know is that on the other side is the enemy. So in this particular situation, you could think about some tools, and normally these are the tools that are coming from the Western countries with their suggestion of kind of applying some mechanism, that can somehow, create some natural cooperation between the countries. And of course, transportation and economic cooperation in that sense is something that probably have the best future. Having said that, that does not mean that is going to resolve the conflict between two countries. What it can make is that next time when they decide to go for war, yes, or to shoot each other, they will first have to think about, oh my gosh, will it close my transportation road that brings me like this number, of trade? Will I really put at risk my economic, prospects.
So economic interdependence is a way to go.
I would say that this is something that Armenia and Azerbaijan, they haven't been having, They exchange the population, so they don't have the issue of, for example, civilian attachment. All their roads are closed. You travel along the border and you see all these huge railroad stations that are non-functional for decades. And they don't even do trade. They don't have any kind of bank operation. They don't have invoice. They have nothing. So you have to start with something, and in that particular case, probably this is something, because this is something that both are interested in at this particular moment, So hopefully that can really succeed, just because it's so much needed for the region.
Ოლesია, Vартаниян, thank you so much.